in Britain. And we're going to see this happening as the EU unravels, and you're going to see true multiculturalism. You're going to see the energy and the culture of the European people, which has been repressed and dumbed down, turned into this kind of politically correct gray mass, a lobotomized population who has been indoctrinated and controlled by a central government. You're going to see that explode, and creativity and diversity, true creativity, true diversity. So let's go to Roger Stone. Of course, Roger Stone has worked for many pro-American political parties in Eastern Europe. And I want to talk to him about that, but we're going to talk about a victory, first of all, that has just happened in regards to our presidential election here. Welcome, Roger.
David, great to be with you.
Did you see this coming? I got to ask you, did you really see this coming? Because I didn't. I thought the people were with it, but I thought they were going to rig the election. It must have been a total landslide for them to be able to win by 4%. I guess they figured they just couldn't swamp the votes that were coming in from the countryside by rigging it and the places that they control.
Yeah, globalism has taken two enormous hits this year. First, the rise of Donald J. Trump, and now the Brexit vote.
Yes.
Globalism is done, and the globalists are increasingly panicky about the prospects for the road ahead. I think this portends very good things about the American election, and I am very pleased with the developments in the Trump campaign. I believe they can now strategically get back on track, get back on offense, because when you're not on offense, you're losing votes.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, when I looked at this, Roger, we saw this division in the UK over Brexit. You had the Labour leadership really versus the Labour voters. The Labour voters had really gotten the shaft with globalism. And yet the Labour leaders, the Labour union leaders as well as the Labour Party leaders were supporting staying in this globalism that had cost their voters their jobs. And then we saw the Tory leadership divided as well. Here in America, we've got the Democrat leadership like Hillary Clinton, who was pushing, say, keep this together, and yet it's their voters, their blue-collar voters, who are being hurt by this, just like we saw in England. And then we've got the GOP establishment, and the only person on the other side of that is Donald Trump, but it's big enough that he can stand there with the blue-collar voters, I think, and with the Republican voters who understand what's going on, the people that Bilderberg was so concerned about, they called the precariat. I think they should be very concerned about that precariat. I think they should be very concerned about this, the people understanding how globalism has really screwed them over.
Yeah, I think it's a very analogous situation. I mean, ironically, it is the Democratic Party and the Clintons who brought us NAFTA. Remember what it was that Ross Perot said about NAFTA? He said that sucking sound you hear of the jobs leaving America.
Yeah.
Of course, he turned out to be exactly right. Once again, the leadership of the Democratic Party and some in the union movement supporting NAFTA, now I think a great recognition, particularly among the Bernie Sanders voters, that these large globalist trade deals, whether it's NAFTA or TPP, TPA, they're leaving the American economy behind. So it is a precursor. I really believe at the end of the day, Trump will be able to get almost a third of the Sanders voters, not his hard left voters, but those labor-oriented voters who both oppose the Iraq War and oppose these globalist trade deals.
And who also oppose the establishment essentially controlling them, the corrupt establishment, because that was also a big part of it as well. People didn't like what was happening in Brussels, and people don't like what the establishment of both parties are doing to them. And that's a reaction that we see with the Sanders voters as well as with the Trump voters. So I agree with you. I think he's got a very strong case to make to both of them.
The American people now aren't buying it. In other words,
That's right.
I think voter dissatisfaction and voter suspicion has now spread beyond the institutions of government and the Congress and the political system to now include big media. In other words, the voters know that CNN is in bed with the political establishment. They know that CNN is only going to publicize information beneficial to the Clintons. That's why we sometimes jokingly call it the Clinton News Network.
That's right. And of course, that narrative of talking about how how Brexit was xenophobic and racist. They didn't buy that either. I talked about how the Labour Party was divided, for the membership from the voters from the leadership, and how the Tories were divided. But the media in Britain was all together on that racist, xenophobe narrative. The people can get their information outside of mainstream media now, and the truth will out on this, and it did in the Brexit.
The New World Order is getting its butt kicked at high noon. Thankfully, the highly suspicious demise of Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia has, for the time being, not been a factor in the Supreme Court's decision on Obama's dangerously lawless immigration policy, as Obama pushes the country to the brink of anarchy. Of course, it didn't take long for the Obama administration to thumb its nose at the deadlocked judicial branch and the will of the American people.
Deferred action policy that has been in place for the last 4 years is not affected by this rule. Enforcement priorities developed by my administration are not affected by this ruling. This means that the people who might have benefited from the expanded deferred action policies, long-term residents raising children who are Americans or legal residents, they will remain low priorities for enforcement.
But like a castle made of sand, the fragile globalist secret world government has been dealt a strong blow by the waves of consciousness, inevitably finding a way to the shore of a free world. Adon Salazar writes, Nigel Farage, the leader of the UK's Independence Party, which played a huge part in mobilizing UK citizens behind the Brexit, speculated the momentum behind the results could usher in a Trump presidency. With the Brexit debacle landing in the laps of the self-serving, arrogant Bilderberg scum, a propulsion of liberty is accelerating, and the globalists know it. Brace yourself for planetary turbulence. The New World Order will either go quietly in the night, as they wisely should, or their maniacal desperation to rule the world will result in more false flags and order out of chaos, ultimately winding its way down the path toward a very public downfall. People have been asking, how will the Brexit affect the United States? Will it impact the stock market, the Federal Reserve's interest rate, global diplomatic relations? These questions are all based on a ruinous, stagnant, counterfeit system devouring the sovereignty of nations that must be finally recognized and dismantled. Presidential candidate Donald Trump congratulated the UK for voting to assert its independence from the EU and encouraged the American people in November to also assert their independence from the global elite.
I said this was going to happen, and I think that it's a great thing, and we will see, but I think it's going to be a great thing.
And he was
for David Cameron right to resign?
Basically, they took back their country. That's a great thing.
Following the British vote to exit the EU, Trump said the election results marked a shift toward more nationalistic tendencies. The Trump campaign said in a statement, come November, the American people will have the chance to redeclare their independence. Americans will have a chance to vote for trade, immigration, and foreign policies that put our citizens first. They will have the chance to reject today's rule by the global elite and to embrace real change that delivers a government of, by, and for the people. Trump continued, I hope America is watching. It will soon be time to believe in America again. As INFOWARS has reported countless times, the idea for the European Union globalist superstate came directly out of discussions held at the secretive Bilderberg Group conference in 1955, at which European politicians considered the necessity to bring German people into a common European market as quickly as possible. The lunacy of the global elite can't survive once their dark secrets are completely exposed. Thomas Jefferson once said, nothing can stop the man with the right mental attitude from achieving his goal, and nothing on earth can help the man with the wrong mental attitude. John Bound for INFOWARS.com.
David Knight on this day that Britain has declared its independence through Brexit. Joining us now to talk about the implications is Dr. Steve Pachinik, no stranger to INFOWARS listeners, but let me remind you of his qualifications: an MD, a PhD in American psychiatry, a former State Department official, author, publisher, critically acclaimed author, along with Tom Clancy of the paperback series. Dr. Steve Pieczenik, and you'll find him at stevepieczenik.com. Welcome, Dr. Pieczenik.
Thank you for bringing me on the show, Paul. I really wanted to come on the show just to give a little perspective from my point of view and to say to our audience, a wonderful audience, and to you and Alex, that this was coming about for quite a long time. First of all, I've been writing about this for about 20 years. In one of the Op Center series, I wrote about the devolution of the EU and the necessity for the EU to devolve into entities, not necessarily nation states. Then in my book 1 and book 2 of Steve Talks, I insisted that Brexit be the beginning of the end of the EU. Now, let me explain if I don't think anybody else has explained. The EU was created at the time when I was in France in '88 on a mission, was created between France and Germany as an attempt to stop Germany from coming into power again or allowing it to become a martial force. This was a total ethereal concept concocted by a few French socialists and sociology, none of which had any bearing on reality. What France was afraid of, and it has always been afraid of, is that France has lost wars since the time of Napoleon Bonaparte, who, by the way, was Corsican. But because of World War I and World War II, France decided that it needed to co-opt Germany into a concept called the European market. The whole aspect of it was fallacious. It had one currency, it had no military, no intelligence, no force behind it. It had France not as the central power, but Germany became the central power, and the Frankfurt Bank of Germany was actually the most powerful element in all of the EU. So for the past 10 to 15 years, as much as France would like to think that they co-opted Germany, Germany, in fact, became the dominant power, paradoxically. As a result, they lent out a lot of money and credits to Spain, Italy, and Portugal, who in turn defaulted on all their loans. So what does this mean for the Alex Jones Show and for us in general? For America, quite frankly, at the bottom line, it's extremely good what happened in EU. The reason for that is that flight capital and certain immigrants will start to come to the United States because in this world of uncertainty and disorder, the one country that maintains its political, economic, and military stability is the Republic of the United States. What, in fact, will happen to the rest of Europe is that nationalism will arise, and eventually we will see Catalonia or Barcelona break away from Spain, which is already a corrupt country, was not really a country itself. It was created by a French king who, in fact, coagulated the Basque in Valencia and Madrid and the Catalan provinces. That will break up. Part of France will overthrow probably Hollande, the president, who's a socialist, because they have a major unemployment problem, and they're now in riot mode. The immigration problem that came in from Syria as a result of Putin's punishment to the West for our taking down the Soviet Union has now made it more imperative for the European countries to make sure that they don't have what's called the Schengen Agreement. In other words, they will refuse to accept immigrants and they will refuse to accept other Europeans to come through their own country. From our point of view, unfortunately, as a republic, we did not anticipate this on the formal level, although some of us who wrote and were part of the Alex Jones and the Alex Jones Nation and the INFOWARS Nation, we could see it coming very quickly and actually insisted on it because it had a strong bearing on what we do here in America. And what do I mean? For many reasons, and we've talked about this for over 14 years, the stand down and the false flags that were created by Bush, Cheney, and eventually the Clintons were involved, and now Obama, was really part of not only taking away our guns, but more importantly, reinstituting the federal government as a major source of power over the states and the governors. I had warned the federal government repeatedly at expense to myself and others, as has Alex and as has many people at the INFOWARS Nation, that the federal government can no longer sustain its legitimacy if it continues to produce these false flags like Orlando, Sandy Hook, and